Welcome to the Investor Minded Framework. In this video, we're talking about making an offer on a property. Now, while a lot of this legwork is going to be handled by generally your realtor, these are things you may be able to do on your own if you're approaching a property that's off market and you aren't involving a realtor. One of the first things we would look at is comparable sales, other properties that are selling for the same or similar prices in the area. Now, with commercial properties, things do shift a little bit. And even with small residential, we do look at things a little bit differently than just a single family residential property, where we're just looking at what is this property worth? What did my neighbor sell for? Oftentimes, when people are buying a home, that is the question: what did my neighbor sell their home for? Because if they sold their home for that, there's a chance I could sell my home for that as well. When we get into the investment side of things, we look at things more often as what is value added? How can I add value to this property? And I'm not just saying replacing the roof, I'm saying how can we increase the actual income of the property over the long term to be able to improve the value of this investment. So those can be just doing repairs to the property to make it more habitable, to open it up to a segment of the market that hasn't been interested. You may have a property that's worth $1,000 per unit in rent, and it's been stuck at that because the interior condition of the property is not something that a resident is going to pay $1,300 a month for. So as you do those renovations, you've added value to the property. By adding that value to the property, it also has increased the income, which is that added value. And by increasing the income is something that can increase the value for the sold property as well, because you know that the property can perform. So we've understood our comparable sales, and that's something that your realtor may be able to just give you a report on to help you make a decision on purchase price. But if you're off market, we would go back to one of our earlier steps of the process and understand what's the rent and what is the cost of other properties that have sold in this area. Earnest money is something that matters as well. Generally can be 1% of the actual purchase price of the property and oftentimes is included in the purchase agreement for buying a home. That's something that you need to consider in your closing costs if you are going to make an offer on a property, because that can give you that extra bit of skin in the game when it comes to making that offer. If somebody submits an offer and they don't have any kind of earnest money saying, hey, I actually care about buying this property, you can already beat them out in caring that much more. Hey, I'm actually already invested in this property even without having invested. The downside of earnest money is if you don't have a contingency to allow you to walk away from the deal, if that contingency is fulfilled, you would lose that earnest money deposit. So that's why it matters so much to the seller that you have that skin in the game. You're saying, hey, I'm comfortable losing this money, possibly, if I have the situation where contingency is not met. So there are a couple of different kind of contingencies that can exist. We'll go into two basic ones here, one of them being the inspection contingency and one of them being the financing contingency, generally a lending contingency as well. So the inspection contingency is a contingency that allows you to be able to walk away from that transaction, keeping the earnest money deposit if there is something that you are able that actually qualifies as a significant adverse defect to the property, something that would significantly materially affect the transaction and holds you off from actually purchasing that property. That is why a inspection can be so beneficial when it comes to touring these homes. The inspector is able to give an opinion as a professional saying that this is a defect on the property, whether it be health and safety, structural longevity, all those different things could be reasons for you to walk away from the property if it's not a good deal. Financing contingency also matters as well. The lender has an interest in this part of the process because if you were to default on the loan, they have to ensure this property is still marketable. They have to ensure that they could still sell it to the private market or even the public market if there is an issue with the property, that it's also accounted for as well. Lenders are not in the interest of buying real estate. They're in the interest of allowing others to buy real estate and making money off of people buying real estate. But a financing contingency is what can allow you to be able to walk away from a deal if lending doesn't meet. So, for example, if you have a property where there is a issue with the zoning that doesn't allow the lender to be able to lend on the property, that could be a way for you to be able to walk away from the transaction and keep your earnest money deposit. Now, if you've already paid for an inspection, all those different private options that you have that may be covered underneath your purchase agreement as things you've elected to do, I can't guarantee you're going to get the money back from those things. There's things that you've elected to do, but the earnest money does play into those other contingencies in a very direct way. Those are conversations I would highly recommend having with your realtor to understand how do all these things play into effect on this transaction. In this case, I can't speak for every transaction out there, but I can give you the base level knowledge to at least lead you in the direction to have those questions. And then on the negotiation side of things, all four of those things play a role. Being able to know whether or not the property is listed at a price that is similar to comparable sales, whether or not earnest money deposit is actually needed. Do you think anybody else may be even needing to have earnest money in this transaction? Does the seller want you to have earnest money in this transaction? And then an inspection contingency and a financing contingency also matter as well as ways out of what could have been a really bad deal. At that step of the process, once you've answered all those questions, you should be at the point where you're able to say, I'm ready to buy.